Good evening, everybody. I think it's 6:30, so I think we can kick off. Right, firstly I need to read out the fire evacuation procedures. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening, therefore if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the side of this room. Exit through reception and meet in the War Memorial Park. Webcast of meetings. This meeting is being webcast live on the internet and will be available to view on YouTube after the meeting. Please can I remind members and officers that in order to be heard clearly within the room by those present and on the webcast, that you speak directly into your microphone. The microphone stem can be moved so it's as close to your mouth as possible, and please switch your phones off or turn to silent. Right, so apologies for absence and substitutions. I have got Councillor Miller has been replaced by Councillor Golding. Councillor Carr has been replaced by Councillor Robinson. Councillor Ganesh is replaced by Councillor Compton-Burnett. And Councillor Jones is replaced by Councillor McCormick. Any declarations of interest? Are there any declarations of interest? Okay, thank you. Urgent matters. I'm not aware of any urgent matters. The minutes of the previous meeting held on the 21st of November 23. Are the committee agreed that the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of November 23 are an accurate record?
If I may, questioning the factual accuracy, which is all I'm allowed to question. Fifth bullet point down on page 6. Whilst the huge increase in staffing in grounds maintenance, I don't believe the word huge was used on the night. Elsewhere in the paper it refers to significant increase. I think huge is factually incorrect.
Anything else? That's it. Thank you. I'll now move that the minutes of the meeting can be signed as a correct record, apart from that amendment from Councillor Basham. And is that okay? Right, we'll now move on to item 5, which is the proposed KPI measures, and Katie Salis is going to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. The briefing paper in front of you, submitted for scrutiny, details the proposed key performance indicators for 24-25. These have had their initial discussion at Performance Panel on the 8th of January, where heads of service were present to answer specific questions around the measures being proposed. Additionally, we have the appendix to the report, which seeks to create transparency as to the grading scale. I'd be pleased to understand, as a scrutiny committee, any areas you would suggest for further review or consideration ahead of these measures continuing along the journey to Cabinet on the 5th of March in readiness for the new municipal year. Thank you.
So we open it up to any questions. Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm a last minute substitution, so I've only had like 24 hours to look at these papers. My first question is, who is the council accountable to on these KPIs? And then I have a number of questions on some of the KPIs that are in there. The first being page 13, the EV car club. So I'd be really interested to see how successful that has been. But it looks like we're going to be removing that. Similarly, the green team, page 14, and page 16, the economic indicator. Why are we removing that? It's like not our problem, the council, but there's clearly issues that we need to address as a priority regarding the town's economy across a number of different factors. And on page 18, biodiversity, why is that being removed? And then I was struggling to see why we didn't have similar indicators on the football club and the aquadome stroke ice rink. Now, some of these are things that the council is going to do in terms of projects, is going to indulge significant amounts of money looking at a new aquadrome. The ice rink, huge residents' disappointment in that, huge expectation that we put that right, and rightly so, because the ice rink is now, according to the Gazette, ranked third worst in the country. Similarly, the football club, and there doesn't appear to be an indicator there on Winkelbury regeneration either. So I would like to understand what the council's role is going to be in that going forward, because if we are going to make the Winkelbury regeneration work, then we should have that as a KPI, because we haven't regenerated anything in over 10 years. And we know that regeneration is harder now than it was 10, 20 years ago when we did 3 or 4 of them in Popley and Oakridge. So that's all my questions, thank you.
Okay, so in terms of who are we accountable to on the performance of these KPIs, they get reported back to Cabinet on the quarterly basis on terms of have we delivered them or not, and then subject to scrutiny. So that is the process they go through in terms of the challenge that we have. We had a discussion at performance panel around what constitutes a KPI, what could get chosen out of the council plan to be a measure that we choose. We would have a high number of measures if we chose every single priority along the way, and so the ones that were chosen were considered to be the most appropriate there. I can clearly from this evening take back a recommendation around the Winkelbury and the ones that you feel are missing, because that is the point of this evening, so that I can then share that with colleagues in Cabinet briefing to consider those.
Councillor Harvey.
Good evening, everybody. Just a couple of thoughts to pick up on Andy's points, well made. I guess the spread of the account, and interesting getting to understand the KPIs from this side of the fence in the past 9 months. I think a lot of it is around accountability, that we are accountable as an executive to the council. The council itself then accountable to residents. So there's a real direct transparency point there throughout this whole process, and we need to review that on a constant basis. And I know other councillors raised that. I mean, going back to the first meeting I sat in, and Councillor Bean, you were raising that before as a key point, so recognise that. I think the other aspect in terms of who we're accountable to is government, because quite a number of the actual indicators become statutory indicators. They're there because we are obliged by government to have them. So there's a real relationship there as well that we need to think about and tease out. In terms of the other that you identified, a thought comes to mind that it's what a KPI is and how we capture it. So what would the KPI be? Because as an organisation, we have KPIs for our performance, and it's our delivery of our services and our priorities. Similarly, so if it's somebody else's priority or somebody else's delivery, it could well be the football club, it could be others, it could be, for example, Vivid. How do we, as an organisation, then have a KPI that relates to somebody else's delivery of something? And we just need to tease that out and think that through. What does the partnership element mean to that? So I think it's a fair comment, and we need to take that away from what you've said, I think, and just think it through quite carefully.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Page 14, regarding the Green Team, the first 2 questions are fairly straightforward, and I know they're out there. But how do we gather the information of customer satisfaction and proportion of households that are taking action based on their advice? How are we gathering that information?
I would need to take that back and ask the head of service exactly how they're going to do that.
Any other questions? Okay. Sorry, Councillor Compton-Burnett.
Sorry, actually, I've just realised it's probably more of a comment than a question, so I'll wait.
Thank you. Councillor Golding.
I also have lots of comments, to be fair. I'll try and phrase some as questions. How is household waste recycling rate percentage a KPI? Because if it doesn't have a standard, you're literally just reporting a figure. to me, that's not a KPI. You're not expecting any change. You're not measuring any change. It's literally just saying what our recycling rate is.
That is one where we have data that we can benchmark ourselves again on what we're actually achieving in those areas. So whilst we're not putting in a target for ourselves, it's something we are monitoring, and then we would be able to see how we compare to other councils. That's why the wording of that has been amended, so we can give that contextual performance data.
So surely our KPI should be that we're of a standard, but like with comparative other local authorities, that we're in the top 50%, that we're in the top 20%, rather than just reporting a figure.
On the amendment to how this is worded, but it's worded at the moment, so it's an exact replica of the benchmark data from LGC.
Thank you. I would appreciate that being taken forward, because I do think, you know, the whole point of KPIs is that we're stretching ourselves and challenging, and we're being held accountable. So if it's just reporting the reality, it's... Thank you.
Councillor Bean.
Yeah, I have comments as well, but I'm going to try and phrase something as a question. So, as an example, just touching on one of the indicators that Councillor Robinson just spoke about a moment ago, which was around customer satisfaction with advice provided based on the advice provided by the Green Team. I mean, that's fine in itself. I guess it sort of begs the question as to why that's a key performance indicator versus perhaps resident satisfaction with facilities that they're using day in, day out. So aquadrome, sports pitches, that kind of thing. I guess the question is, why have we decided to have a satisfaction measure on something that I consider to be a smaller part of what we do in comparison to some of the other services that we provide?
Noted. What we were trying to do there was, because this is a new team, to test the success of it. It's something we haven't done before, but I note your comment around the larger areas. With the wellbeing measures, they're new. They didn't exist before the ones being proposed. We've tried to look at the take-up, but not necessarily the satisfaction, so I note that.
Councillor Basham.
If I may, Chair, just a couple of thoughts from sitting on performance panel, and I'm hoping that other colleagues who attended performance panel might remember. There was definitely a question asked, and the officer answered about measuring the success of the Green Team, and they said at the time they was going to be based on doorstep feedback at the time that they engaged with the resident. Reason being that going back afterwards or at a later date, they'd be knocking the door, they might not answer, they might not be prepared to talk about it. And so I believe that was the best measure they could come up with, but obviously Katie's going to take it away and we'll come back with whatever she comes back with. I did have another point, but it's slipped my mind, so I'll come back if I remember it.
Thank you, Paul. And actually, I'll just to clarify that, something, because I asked when we did this, went through these measures, was to say how can we prove the effectiveness of the team actually in whether people take up things like insulation, green energy solutions, because obviously that's really the outcome that we want, is that obviously to help impact the climate change stuff. So that was something we did.
I did remember the other one. Thank you, Chair. I did remember the other one. It was to do with sports attendance, and I believe, and again it came at performance panel, and I believe the answer was that we don't. I think it was a mixture of we don't control all the sports facilities, and the ones that we do control don't often. They have membership, but they don't sort of clock in, clock out. So attendance numbers, and that doesn't answer satisfaction numbers, but attendance numbers were varied from site to site, whether we could collect them.
Councillor Bean.
Yeah, I'm going to try and phrase comment as a question. So I guess it's back on the health and wellbeing stuff. So I guess great to see something in here. I think that's been lacking, even, you know, previous administration. So I'm really pleased to see that. I guess, is there a reason why we've gone for more of an output-based measure rather than an outcome? Because for me, the number of people participating in X and Y, what does that actually mean? So I guess the question is why output versus outcome?
Certainly from the discussions we had at panel, it was what data was available to evidence, certainly the take-up of it. And it was that we don't necessarily have the satisfaction outcome data at this point.
Sorry, I guess just to come on that, but it's more than satisfaction. Like, what is the purpose of these events? And someone being satisfied with it is one thing, but I guess there are outcomes that we're trying to drive as part of this. And I'm not saying we're going to get it right sort of first time, but I guess for me it's that these really should be outcome focused rather than output.
You can take that away and look at that.
Oh, thank you, Paul. I was going to just add on that, actually, Katie. I think looking at outcome, talking what Councillor Bean's talking about, I think looking at in correlation to obesity levels, for example, general health and fitness around, which we can pick that data up through NHS data, I believe. So that would potentially be a way of doing a comparative.
Just a couple of reflections, just thinking that through again. The KPI that might reflect the performance of the council is one element, the team is one element. The reflection on the context of which the position might be. For example, as you say, it might be another indicator. It isn't a reflection of the council, that's a reflection of the issue we're discussing. I think we just need to tease out the KPI in that regard. As far as the Green team is concerned, just in terms of anecdotal responses thus far to their work has been incredibly positive. And interestingly, Officer team responding back saying, it's nice to have somebody giving me advice that isn't trying to sell me something. That context of having a trust element that's being built up because of the team's experience and also the extra training of the team to give more. So while they're going out and doing the door knocking and giving the advice, we're training them and supporting them to go even further with what they can do with people, particularly around insulation in their homes. So the success element anecdotally is really positive. How you capture that in a KPI is the question you're asking, and I think that is complicated.
Councillor Robinson?
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, the feedback I've had on the Green team has been exactly the opposite from that the advice that people have got has been so basic and so obvious that has been of no use to them anyway. They've certainly been out there and doing the job, but the advice I've heard that they've given out has just been the sort of advice you could get from any 10-year-old at school. Thank you.
Nick, if you'd like to share some of that with us, I'd be very... it's important that the team understand. I'm disappointed in that, and I don't think that is the broad case. I really don't, from the feedback we've had. But I would welcome you giving that evidence to us.
I think it was Councillor Golding next.
Thank you. I still have several questions, but I'll limit myself to one at a time. I'm approaching this from a place of concern, really. Page 17 of 20, which talks about our targets and how we understand the grading. It genuinely concerns me that the idea that we could not meet a target, but if somebody decided it was a small marginally near the target, they'd count it as achieved anyway. That feels very, very dangerously open to interpretation to me. Could you explain how you would see it working?
I think in some of the previous discussions, people didn't understand what would constitute something being an amber or a red. And what we were trying to do is, in the broad terms, say the parameters we would apply. Because sometimes it is so marginal, it can be point something of a percentage. And is that really a failure, or is it within the realms of acceptability? And that's really what we're testing with laying it out like this. Is that acceptable to the organisation, that we approach it like that? Because historically we've never actually said what would make something a red or an amber. The green is very easy, but when does it tip over into those other areas? So I note what you're saying, and it could be that we say it has to be spot on, that there is no deviation at all, but it can be amended. But it was just an opportunity to look at this in a slightly different way.
I think I would probably, I feel a bit mixed about it. I think I'd probably feel slightly more comfortable if we said within 2% Or do you know, like if we really quantified it, because then it's not open to interpretation, and a bit more measurable.
Councillor Bean.
Thank you. I just have a question in related to it's page 10 of 20, and it's the new indicators being proposed around processing times, which I think are great measures, right? Because they're saying how well we're delivering on these things. I think it's probably a similar question to that which Hannah had around the recycling rates. Like, how are we determining with these ones, like what's good and what's bad? I'm assuming, like, what is the benchmark? So as a measure, I think good, but how do we know if it's good or bad?
Sorry, I'm trying to multitask here. What I was saying is I'm just going to look on the scale points, because then that will indicate what we believe would be acceptable here. So we would say 7 days is meeting, and then nine days is not, and so on. So the target, sorry, I haven't got a header in with the thing. Let me just go back. So, yeah, so 7 days is the target. If we got 9 days, we'd have failed it, 8 amber. So 7 days is meeting it if we met that target.
Just to come back on that, and I guess the target that we've set, is that just based on how we perform currently, or is that more of a stretch-based target? I guess, like, how we come up with those numbers, is it just based on whatever the baseline is now? Are we stretching ourselves to do better than how we're performing at the minute?
I would need to ask the head of service that. I don't have that data, but I'll find out.
Well, actually, this is a topic that's always been close to my heart. Actually, recycling rates. As over the years, I've gone through this. You can. I've always looked at things like recycle.com or recyclenow.com, I think it is, and you'll see where we fit. We're not great in that scale, and that gives you across all the boroughs around the country. Last year, I think the target was about 30% on recycling, so I think they are pushing it up a little bit. But I do believe, speaking from what I've heard from the head of service and things, that a lot of the issues are tied up with DEFRA and the things that have changed. I don't know if Paul wants to.
As far as government's concerned, this is a moving feast, and it seems to move every change of minister or every change of perspective, to be honest with you, let alone change at county, because don't forget county's role in this as well. So from that perspective, I think trying to capture a consistent KPI is going to be interesting, but you're not wrong in what you're saying. It's how we do it, isn't it? And I respect that.
Sorry, I guess just to be clear, I think my point was around the processing of housing benefit claims, which is definitely within our gift. I think what I'm asking is that the benchmarking there, is that just based on current performance, and we're sort of going slap bang in the middle based on how we're performing now? But I guess the question is should we be performing better than we are now? So it's how we created that sliding scale.
No, thank you for that explanation. We'll take that away.
Sorry, Councillor Phillimore.
Yeah, cheers, Sarah. This one's for you. Page 19, we're talking about fly tipping incidents per 1,000 residents. Are we just measuring the fly tipping incidents that the council removes? Because obviously we don't remove stuff on private land, which is a bugbear to all of us. So what is the measurement there? Is that just what we remove, or is it total?
That is my understanding, that it is what we remove, but I will check that with the head of service. Oh, no, Councillor.
Again, this was handled at performance panel, which doesn't really seem to be doing its job with so many substitutes on this committee, but that is all of the fly tipping incidents reported to the council, whoever's land they're on, which I thought was good.
Yes, sorry. You've reminded me of my own notes now of the evening. So it's anything, as you say, that's reported to us. It's a proposed national metric being introduced by the government in due course. So it's in preparation for that one.
I don't profess to remember everything that happened at the performance panel, but there's some that are jogging my memory. Just on those financial services indicators where we talk about average processing times for housing benefit claims, would it be possible to define in here what type of average that is, whether that's a mean average, a mode or a median? because we will get different outcomes. Similarly, with the other financial services indicators, we talk about collection rates. Now, if that's business tax or council tax, it's quite clear that's the percentage of the amount due. But further up, it says debt collection rates percentage. Now, is that by number of debts collected or by value of debts collected? Because they also can come up with very different answers. I also have a request for Cabinet and the finance team to think about with regards to the KPI for Treasury Management portfolio return and for Treasury Management portfolio return actual millions. There are many different ways of measuring returns. These are the returns that are measured with the government statutory override, which means that we don't consider capital losses to be part of returns. So I think that should be clear in the indicator, or, and this is where I think you might get some pushback from those involved, whether that should be absolute return, but then that wouldn't align with the budget, so I understand why you might get pushback. Thank you.
It was Councillor Robinson next, unless Councillor Beans is related on Councillor Gold. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Top of page 25, the non-major planning application appeals. I'm confused by the figures that are given. We are currently losing 35% of the appeals, and the target we should be, the national target we should be aiming for is 10%. And then it goes on to say, to align with government approach, would be 4 allowed appeals against 622 non-major applications decided, which equals 0.64% as opposed to 35%. I don't understand where we're getting this 0.64 from when earlier in the same paragraph it's talking the limit is 10%. I'm confused about what's written there completely.
I will ask the head of service to clarify that. Thank you. Oh,
Well, I can clarify that as chair of DC, and we had a briefing on the subject on the 16th. So this 10% is 10% of all major applications determined are overturned. Yeah, the non-majors, the 64%, that's a finger in the air figure. So yeah, I'll await what the head of service says about that. But the biggie is the 10% of major applications overturned on appeal. We exceeded it last year by quite a considerable margin, 14.5%. We narrowly missed out on designation. I think if it had been above 15, we would have got it, because Fareham got it and one other on the south coast got it. This year, because it's a 2-year rolling average, we're still over, but it's about 11.5%. So we're not quite out of the woods yet. But in terms of that non-major application, well, I'll await the comments of the head of department.
I've got Councillor Bean next.
Thank you. I just have a quick question around the many down indicators. Again, these feel like parts of deliverables of a overarching plan, right, rather than a KPI, which is fine, because I get it's probably challenging at this point to start to put some numbers down, which might talk about houses built or whatever. I think my question is around these. Why isn't there a timescale that says that we would expect, like this is very open-ended for the whole of this year, but surely we must be able to drill these down a little bit further in terms of when we might expect to reach these milestones, just to hold ourselves a little bit more accountable to some of these things.
there was quite a wide-ranging discussion at Performance Panel about this, and the inclusion actually of the major programmes and projects as KPIs, which they are not in the traditional sense. And what the recommendation of the panel had been that night is to move to a milestone approach, and it's yes or no each time it's measured with the dates for the milestones.
Can I just clarify then? So within the detail, there are timescales by which we would expect to meet these specific deliverables, and that is what we'll be holding ourselves accountable against. Cool. Thanks.
The running on.
Councillor Golding.
Thank you. So in section 4.8, which is the housing and social inclusion, we seem to be getting less information than we have been previously, which is quite worrying. And I know it's because before we weren't getting enough information, which made it hard to interpret, but now we're getting even less information, which feels like it's going to be even harder to interpret what's going on. So I appreciate we're using some statutory measures, but because it's so binary, that doesn't give anybody any indication of of what's really going on. So no use of B&B exceeding 6 weeks for families with dependent children. Apparently pregnant women don't count anymore. I'd love to know why. But it's that can be yes or no, but we could fail that spectacularly with having 15 families, or we could fail that with one because there's one particularly complex case. And as a councillors, I think probably everyone around the table would be much more worried if it was 15 than if it was one particularly difficult case. But we won't ever be able to kind of have that information or that context.
Not speaking for the head of housing, but I know there's a lot of data that is reported on annually as part of the housing strategy delivery, and it's not pulling all of those pieces of information across. But I'll take back your comments on what you've said.
Thank you. Back in my day, when I was on performance panel, we had a few KPIs, but then we did have a little bit of kind of extra data around that underlying it, and that was quite reassuring and did add a bit of the context. So we weren't necessarily measured on it, but we were able to see a bit more information.
It's interesting to hear Councillor Golding's view on that, because what I took away from the performance panel recently was that there was a desire to remove data points that we didn't necessarily control but that gave context, and there was a desire to focus in on what is truly a KPI that the team can actually affect. And I think that, you know, with that we lose some context, but there was also, I remember the Officer for Housing explaining that an enormous amount of housing data comes forward in the annual housing report that comes to this committee. So, I mean, the KPI list is already very long. We go through an exercise to try and improve it every year. I think we make some improvements. We probably take some things out and make some mistakes. And obviously this meeting is designed to try and capture some of those, but I think it is a process of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Yeah, that's why the contextual data is disappearing.
Paul?
It's that real balance, isn't it, between not repeating for the sake of repeating, having documents that we can scrutinise in far more microscope level, particularly around housing and around homelessness. So I do take that away, we can look at that. I think the other interesting aspect to all of that is, like you were saying, it could on one occasion be one side of one indicates a dramatic change within the context that's set of the actual KPI. So when the KPI is now presented, one of the things that Katie's team have been working on is that background context that comes with the KPI, so that you get to see, for example, on recycling, well, if we've had the situation with the pandemic, if we've had the situation with the way COVID has affected the way people and cost of living has affected people's behaviour, the KPI might well show red, but actually we have a context behind that as to the reason why it's changed. So again, it's just that notion of trying to give more data but more meaningfully, and this is an iterative process because this is going to change, I think, over the next few years as the team develop this even further with your help.
We've got Councillor McCormick next.
Are we on comments yet? Are we still on questions?
I think it's sort of merging, but kind of comments.
It's kind of merged.
But yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so it was a comment, and obviously we do have KPIs like recycling that are collated at government level, but I think what we have to bear in mind is what the public expectation of this council is and what their expectations are of this council. So I think in terms of having a performance panel recommend a limited set of KPIs. That's measuring the council on a limited basis. It's kind of letting the administration off the hook a little bit. Really, we should be asking the difficult questions that the public ask us about some of the bigger issue things, because at the end of the day, it's the public's money that we're spending as a council.
Had Councillor Basham next in the list, but I don't know if that's finished right. Councillor Phillimore.
Cheers, Chair. As I understand it, we have to report annually the number of social rented houses. Why is this not in this report? I mean, surely that includes access to social housing.
Now, I'll probably be corrected by the head of housing here, but the AMR that's published considers all of those figures, so it's recorded in the annual monitoring report. So the number of social houses that are actually built is there on the record as part of that report. That comes to committee, you get to see that, it's publicly published, it's a public record of it. Whether it gets turned into a KPI is something I'll take away this evening and ask the head of housing, where we sit on that. But I am conscious it is captured and is recorded. But good point, mind you.
Just to follow up on that, Paul, if we include affordable housing, why can't we put in social rented? Sorry.
Councillor Compton-Burnett.
Thank you. Just a couple of things. So, page 39 of the sort of blue section, I'm not quite sure. Or actually, no, it's page 39 of the whole thing, isn't it? The trees. I remember a big discussion about tree canopy. Is this the net increase of trees, or is it, if we take loads out, does anybody notice?
Councillor Basham.
If I may, Chair, that is the actual number of trees planted, because there is no way of recording trees removed by the various agencies at the moment. I'm after Tom Payne's job.
Can I have something else as well, please? And building on what Councillor Harvey was saying, something that I noticed in page 41 was we refer in all new housing register applications assessed within 10 working days following receipt of all relevant information. Now, you include that condition there, but we don't when we're talking about new housing benefit claims. And I think very often it's exactly the people that can't get hold of the information that need it most. And so I think it would be really good if we took that out and made the timing something that we could meet and gather the information as part of it.
And Councillor Bean.
I'm going to move on to a comment, and I'm probably going to reiterate what I asked as a question, but I do feel quite passionately about it, and having now reflected on the fact that there's another measure in here around resident satisfaction with parks and open spaces. Now, I accept things like the Aquadrome are effectively being run by another organisation, but I would argue with the sheer volume of residents, going to the Aquadrome each year, and I'm not saying it should just be limited to the Aquadrome, but I do think there is something I know we will be holding ourselves accountable to it anyway. I'm sure nothing has changed in that portfolio, but there is something for me about bringing that up a level. I would like that captured as a comment in terms of something to think about.
I think, just to add to what Councillor Bean said, I think actually if we did look at it, although it was pushed back, that performance panel about the fact that we don't have control over so many of the sporting organisations, etc., but at least those where we do have partnership, we could be looking at footfall and take up and membership and sort of activity. I think that would be really good. I feel very strongly about this too. I think it's really important.
We're bearing in mind with partner organisations and we're talking to them about their data with our data. It's all that kind of relationship stuff. I totally get what you're saying. I won't make you a promise we can't keep, but at least we need to look at it in the way you've asked, so we'll take that away for definite. Respect the question asked.
So I guess just to add, the things with the Aquadrome, it's not just about footfall, it's about the quality of what's there. And I think we can all acknowledge along the way we have had a few bumps in terms of the aquadrome. So, you know, it is for me, it's definitely numbers around participation, but it's, you know, is the building clean? Are we happy with things like that? Yeah.
Councillor Golding.
I'm still on questions, I'm afraid. 410, work with schools to explore the opportunities for a youth council. Is there a structure behind there that's actually measurable? Because it's, to be cynical, which obviously I'm not, you could talk to one school for 10 minutes and say you'd achieved that because you'd done some work.
If I seem to remember from performance panel, Councillor Miller, who's chair of this committee, felt very strongly about this one and offered his help, and he scrutinised that KPI quite toughly. I can't remember exactly what the outcome was.
And so at performance panel, it was discussed that the wording should say rooted in the community as per the council plan, establishing it would be the success. And it needs to be inclusive across junior and secondary schools. Much of the groundwork is there. Ward councillors can help here as they will know where councils are set up, and this can be extrapolated up across the education landscape. So that was the discussion at panel to make it more robust.
I think I had Councillor Basham. Did you have a comment on that one? But I'll put.
Members take priority. I'm just here to help. I think in terms of this one, it's going to be interesting to see this evolve. This is a new priority that we've introduced. The idea that both schools and colleges, for that matter, but also the notion of it not being us prescribing what the youth council is. It's an engagement with young people to see what they would want the youth council to be, is the first step we need to take. And I think there's a real interesting relationship there. In the past, when we've done the old citizenship programmes of taking out the local democracy programme into schools, it proved really successful in drumming up support. And it was also interesting between those who were on the school councils who were already engaged, as amongst those young people who were not engaged and suddenly found an opportunity to have an interest because they hadn't been stimulated with the idea of actually you could also participate. And I remember the event we did have at the old Aquadrome as was, when we had hundreds of young people turn up, and it was amazing. If we can get there with this in that way, that would be superb. How we then translate that into a more effective KPI, I think, for us, it would be really helpful. But this is going to be iterative because this is literally the start of the idea and where it goes from here.
So you can tell I like statistics, can't you? I do apologise. I suppose as a starting point, if this is the first year's KPI, my suggestion would be we plan to consult with X number of schools, or 60% of schools in the borough about this, and formalise that somehow. Then at least it's a bit quantitative. You've got something to reach for.
I think I can respect that. It's that notion of, for me as well, I think it's the more qualitative element that says what we get from that is really going to drive this. But I respect you want something in there as a figure. Okay.
This was talked about at performance panel, and the subject of a number was discussed, and it was concluded that if the schools don't want to engage or they want to do it differently, then we would then go out and consult with another 59 and just to meet the KPI, and it would be wasting our time. So I do feel like we need to just balance that one a little.
We cannot force anybody in this at all, so it may well be that we don't get the response. I'd be very shocked and surprised if we don't, but we can't force anybody. As ever with a partner, we need to bring them with us.
If you consult people, they're allowed to say no. You still consulted them, though.
Right, just Councillor Compton-Burnett, I believe.
Thank you. Page 37, we're talking about a couple of surveys for safety, and I think it would be really good to use the same model that we're using for the staff survey, which is to capture the engagement as well as the number of respondents that said they felt safe. So if there's we've got percentage of respondents, but it would also be good to increase the number of responses we had in the first place and have a way of measuring that. so that we know that we're getting more and more people involved. And the other thing is further down that page, now that we've got community police officers, which I think is fantastic, hopefully they will be more aware of ASB cases, which might mean that we actually go up in terms of the number that are reported. So I'm wondering whether there's a way of working with them to make sure that we measure this in a way that's useful, as opposed to all saying, oh crumbs, there's loads more, when actually there isn't loads more, it's just we know about it and we're tackling it really well.
Thank you. Councillor McIntyre.
Thank you, Chair. I was on the performance panel review, so I'm going to apologise for going over a little bit of old ground and potentially changing my position a little bit. So bear with me. I'm hopping about the report pack. So the first one, page 10 of 20, 4.8 housing and social inclusion, which is the number of homeless households with dependent children placed into B&B. Now that corresponds to the new KPI that is on page 41, which talks about no use of B&B. So the proposed change is no use of bed and breakfast exceeding 6 weeks for families with dependent children. Now, it's only going through all this pack and the actual KPI reports that I'm going to get a little bit more context with it, and I'm going to jump right ahead to the KPI 1.21 that actually talks about where we're not meeting that target at the moment. And it makes me realise that on page 10 of 20, the KPI that we were measuring is actually different to what is being proposed now. So the one that is being proposed, 6 weeks, is a statutory limit. So I actually think we should be measuring that anyway. Do we have any families with dependent children in bed and breakfasts exceeding 6 weeks? Because that's a statutory target that we have to hit. If we are failing that, we should know about it. However, we should also want to know how many number of homeless households with dependent children we are placing into B&B. And it's not necessarily a performance measure. It's there to demonstrate that our council is able to support homeless households. And if we aren't hitting our targets that we have set out, which is 14 by the end of last year, for that year, if we aren't hitting our targets, then the indicator is important for councillors to be able to scrutinise that performance. And there is valid context in the KPI that talks about it. For example, current housing pressures. There is a valid argument for why we aren't achieving that target. And now, whether or not that's national or county or something else, there's an explanation, valid explanation against that. However, when I'm looking through other parts of the KPIs, the argument for removing this one is that it's unrealistically undeliverable given current housing pressures. However, when you look at the KPIs further through that document set where it talks about the number of households we've placed in private rented sector, it actually talks about our performance is exceptional given significant restrictions and pressures in the housing market. So I actually think that KPI is important, and I'm going back on the position I had at the performance panel, where I actually think we should keep that one in, because it's telling us something different from the proposed change. It's allowing us to understand if there's an issue, not necessarily measuring the fact that we're keeping up to our statutory requirements. Thank you.
I'm going to do some performance panel feedback on this one now. I've listened to what you said, and where we were talking, I think it was Hannah was talking about the context stuff. And I think actually, even where we may be failing on something, it is still important to pick it up because of the context of cross stuff. So this also ties in with planning and housing delivery, for example. So if we can see where the pressures are, this is a way of highlighting pressures. So actually, I agree. I do recall the head of service talking about this, and I think the rationale was, there was, as you just said, the context was the fact, well, how can we can't affect it? And this is where we did talk, and it's kind of like pushing us back on where we talked so much about only doing KPIs where we have direct input, but actually I think there is a really valid point here that we need to be thinking about. Even if we don't have that direct impact, we need to be aware of what's going on in the context of residents, and that goes back to what Andy was saying about we're delivering service for residents, so that's actually, it's quite critical. So I think it's I think we need to look at this. Paul?
Can I make a suggestion? When we were looking at the KPIs at Performance Panel, we agreed to split the KPIs out and have milestones for the projects. And the reason being that the milestones didn't really fit with the ethos of the KPIs. So the KPIs report is kind of working a bit like a sort of, it's a dashboard, right? It's got reds, ambers and greens on it. It's an umbrella it's an umbrella data set that tells us how the council's performing and the things that we should be aware of as councillors. Would it be useful to have a KPI report which has things that we can affect and measure? And I remember Kate Randall was quite clear about this, that we can't affect the way that she would prefer to be measured. That's probably not the word she would use, but was that it's far more successful to get those families out of B&B and into proper housing quickly than it is to measure how many families had to go into housing for a short into B&B for a very short period of time. So and back to Councillor Phillimore's point about what's our social housing number. It seems to me we need three sets of data. We need the KPIs, we need the milestones, and we need what is essentially a single page, please, of key data indicators that are not KPIs, but are just numbers with trends, please, so that we can just see at a glance how things are moving. And I think that might help.
I'm very happy to take that away and think through on the basis of what you've all been saying.
Okay, Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Chair. Just comment on page 39 with the 400 trees again. I'm sorry. It's an incredibly low bar, 400 trees across the entire borough. I appreciate that it does say greater than 400 trees, but for greater could be 401. Could we not maybe try to set ourselves a slightly higher challenge than such a terribly low bar? Maybe even just 500? But maybe a few more than that would be better. Please, thanks.
I'm going to add my bit in because this is something that we talk about every year and it comes up. And I did speak when we did the performance panel to the head of service about this, because personally I think we should be talking about a net increase in trees, if anything, from a climate and ecological perspective. I do feel as members that we do need to push back a bit on this issue about saying how difficult it is to measure, because there are tools out there that have canopy cover. And I don't think it's that hard to get it. The data might not be updated as regularly, but I do think we really need to look at this. Again, I agree with Councillor Bowes, 400 is a very low amount considering the amount of rural space we've got. I know Hampshire do things. Well, I was up at the Brighton Hill roundabout thing, and I think apparently they planted 100 trees, wasn't it, Andrea? 100 trees just on the Brighton Hill roundabout development. So 400 trees in our borough, it's not a lot, and that doesn't account for where trees get knocked down as well. So it's not a net increase. So I absolutely agree.
Yes, I remember that Tom said on the evening that he felt 400 was an ambitious target when considering where we can plant them. And it costs a lot of money to plant them and maintain them, and we take that seriously in the first 2 years with the watering regime, etc. So typically we have planted 100 a year. So to move to 400, Tom's feedback on the night was that is challenging.
I think there's interesting context as well as to whose land, so I would be also interested to add in the context of the county council in terms of the verges and the way they've had a planting programme recently. I know in my ward we took 200 trees in the last 2 years, purely because we were able to say yes, stick them on the verges. So that was one element. So it's while we do our bit, I think that's worth taking away your point about how far we can push this. There is an interesting debate going on, to say the least, on this point. It's quite a big debate going on about this.
Any further comments?
Thank you. Back on wellbeing again. I agree with Becky. I think it would be good to have some proper measures for wellbeing. It's so important. One idea might be to draft a list of all of the activities and services and groups that the council supports. You know, that we not and also are aware of. You know, so I know that the health and wellbeing team, you know, even if it's just a little bit of advice or a little bit of support, I think it's still worth noting all of the groups that we're aware of, and then working out, okay, that's our starter. Is that what we need? Have we got gaps? Do we need more? But it gives us something measurable to work with. And I think for both the physical health and the mental health. And when we were talking about, you know, the informal and formal and all the rest of it, there is a lot going on in the leisure centres as well that we have made happen because of our partnerships. So a good example is cancer recovery that's taking place in the Aquadrome. And that's something we can do and make a huge difference to people. So capturing that sort of information and using it as a springboard to really get some good groups and services going that we're making an active difference in. I think that would be really good and well worth measuring.
I think one of the things we, correct me if I'm wrong, those who were at the performance panel, I think we talked about what goes on in community centres as well, because obviously where we've got management with community centres, I know certainly in Popley Fields there's probably about actually half a dozen that are directly related to sort of health and wellbeing. The MS Society in Popley Fields, for example, there's other sort of exercise classes, toddler groups, all those sort of young mums type support things, and we could certainly get all that together, but that shouldn't be out of our reach. Anything else from anyone? Oh, we've moved on to comments.
It's on page 38, and I'm as keen on the green economy as the next person, but this point about the increase in number of zero and ultra low emission taxis, from experience on the licensing committee, this is a very difficult subject, and we have to see how we can assist the owner drivers here, because the level of entry, the financial level of entry, and the ageing population of the owner drivers is a barrier to this thing, and we as a council need to address this somewhere down the line.
Watch this space.
Are we done? Councillor Bash.
Sorry, I was trying to sit on my hands and not say this. Whilst I completely respect what Councillor Compton-Burnett said about data, about engagement and the projects that the council's involved in and the sports, etc., all I can do is sit here and just chew over the fact that the Centre Town Sports Centre used to receive a grant from this council and did and does offer still some heart recovery classes, cardiac classes. Pre-pandemic, there were 6 instructors, and I don't know, certainly 3 classes a week I went to, but there were about 15 classes a week. Post-pandemic, there's 1 instructor. I get to go to 2 classes a week. When the instructor's on holiday, there's no class. So I get a lot lower service. I'm still annoyed about it. I would like this council to do something about it, but I do think that I find it quite hard to understand how we can, and I'll be really looking with interest at what we come up with, or what officers come up with, but I'm finding it hard to understand how we can measure. I mean, when we outsource the issue, right, we give it to other people to deliver and wash our hands of it, which is what's happened with our sports centre in the town centre. I don't understand why we're interested in the data, because we're not influencing it and we can't do anything about it. So I think that any data we do get can only be from places where, you know, we have a contract that says that there's something in there about what we expect the Aquadrome. I'm not familiar with the service of the Aquadrome, but you know what we expect the Aquadrome to deliver. but it's really interesting that your experience with the aqua gym is so positive, and mine with the town centre, the better gym, as it's now called, which is an oxymoron in itself, is poor. And I hope the Gazette reports that, actually, because I'm really fed up with it.
I'm just going to add a comment on to Councillor Basham there. I think one of the things I've certainly learned with Scrutiny is we're here to scrutinise and look at what services are delivered to residents in the borough. So I think as a committee we have a responsibility to still look outside of our direct influence. I think that's quite important. I quite agree with you, and I do know one of the points that was raised at the performance panel around the sports, which I think has already been mentioned, is the fact of how much there is out there and whether it becomes a bit of a Herculean task to actually deliver on that. But I do think we certainly have to embrace and look for ways that we can look at making sure that people are healthy and well in the borough, and we're doing everything we can.
Yes, thank you. That's helpful. Something that might be interesting is I spoke to BVA today about community groups and services, and they're at the moment compiling a new webpage of community groups and services, which will be by ward. So they're trying to go out to the individual wards and the community centres there to find out what's going on. And obviously one of the big problems once they've established a list that's searchable by location is keeping it updated. And I spoke to the patient participation groups today about whether maybe the patient participation groups would be willing to update for their area. And certainly there was a lot of interest. So we're going to take it to a meeting next Wednesday and hopefully start to work with BVA to get that list up and running so that we'll be able to see what's there now and what could be there in the future, and also pick up things like you just said, Councillor Basham, about services that we badly need and that could be provided. We just need to get started and do a bit of work on it.
Any more for any more? We've exhausted ourselves, have we? Okay, right, so the recommendation is that this report seeks the views of the Scrutiny Committee on the proposed performance measures for 24-25, detailed in this report, and the performing grading scale Appendix 1. So so we've sought the views, and I think so that's it then really, isn't it? So we move on to item 6, which is the Q1 and Q2 Key Performance Indicator reports. So Katie, you're going to introduce the report. Thank you.
I don't do this very often. Sorry, this briefing note summarises the outturn of the first 2 quarters of this year with the 23-24 suite of measures. They're presented in a different format to the previous Excel spreadsheet. These results were discussed with heads of service on the 10th of December at performance panel, but I'll be pleased to take any comments from yourselves.
Councillor McIntyre.
Thanks. Sorry, can I just qualify, is that Q1 23, Q2 23? Okay, thank you.
Councillor Basham.
Thanks, Katie, for pointing out it's a different format. Always with this stuff, I'm always looking at the trend. So I went through these papers and looked at what's moved from amber to red. Was a bit surprised to find a couple of things moved from green to red. But it would be really helpful if we could, in Q3, have 3 coloured boxes in each comments for each one, so we can see the trend over the quarters. Because I think that if we have something that's, well, it should speak for itself, that if we're on an improving trend or whether we're declining, and we need to be slightly more concerned about it. Thank you.
Yes, whilst we add the performance reporting in terms of a numerical, what I can do is get the RAG status layered over that on the top right-hand corner, so it's just visually there immediately.
So no further questions. Are there any comments? Oh, Councillor McIntyre.
Yeah, thanks. KPI 1.9, which is slide 8, Aquadrome outline business case. So in Q1 it was completed and approved January 24, on track, and then in Q2 it was completed and approved by February 24. Target's still on track, so obviously that's changed. Dates have changed, but the target's still on track. Just get a little explanation on that. Thank you.
I'll speak to Sarah Longthorpe about that and come back to you.
Councillor Golding.
Thank you. Just wanted to express my concern really about the decrease in our recycling rate. I think we've already discussed that we're not great as it is. So to become worse than not great is really not good. Is there any context there? The kind of comment said, oh, well, it's just in trend with Hampshire. Are we doing anything about it? I thought Serco were meant to be changing behaviours and trying to remind us to recycle, etc.
Thank you. I stand to be corrected by the officers who obviously know far more about this than I. But the context, I think, around that is around the actual reduction and the change in the nature of the recyclable materials themselves. So as I understand it, one of the impacts that we're seeing of the cost of living crisis is that which people are buying and then is coming through the system. So actually, for example, it's less plastic in some senses and more tins, and there's a variety of change in the nature of the recycling material. And whether that directly addresses the question you've asked, Hannah, I'm not sure. So I'll take the question offline, as it were, that you've specifically asked and come back to you. But what I understand has been a significant impact is the change in the nature of the recyclable materials that we are actually collecting. And that's having an impact in terms of tonnage, and it's having an impact in terms of the impact, the county of disposal. And that's quite a change, as I understand it. But officers know far more about this than I in terms of that specific detail. We can go back to you on that.
It's a very good question, Councillor Golding, and from what I remember when we looked at this at performance panel, Helen Taylor-Cobbs, the officer, she said that actions that companies are taking to reduce their environmental footprint having an effect. So, for example, the glass that we see now is a lot thinner than it was only 12 to 18 months ago. So I know the glass number has gone down, but perhaps the number, we don't know, but the number count of glass is possibly similar or increased. But there's certainly much thinner glass or lighter glass being sold. The other was, as Councillor Harvey identified, there's a lot more tins and a lot more cartons as the cost of living crisis is forcing people to trade down from glass or trade down from beer bottles to beer cans, that sort of thing. And we're also seeing much lower volumes of recycling of white goods at the furniture project, community furniture project, and other furniture items. So the implication there is that people are holding on to their goods for longer and not switching out and getting a new sofa before Christmas and that sort of activity. So very much the sharp end of the cost of living crisis.
Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Chair. On that, I mean, obviously the cause is not great, the cost of living crisis, but ultimately recycling is a failure because the only thing worse than recycling is sending it to landfill. We should be looking at people using things and reusing things. So I don't know how we would likely to measure that, but the amount of perhaps as percentage if waste goes down and percentage of that recycled goes up. I'm not quite sure how we would measure it, but I think perhaps we should look at finding a way of finding that how to measure it rather than worrying about the tonnage of stuff that's not being reused. Thanks.
And it's really difficult when you've got national indicators and you've got indicators that you're trying to discuss percentages and then go back to what you're suggesting, which is around reuse and promoting a completely different approach for people. The one thing I'm conscious of, and again, this is an anecdotal answer to your question, the Repair Cafe, for example, in Chinham, absolutely hugely successful. Visited that this last weekend. They have found their feet and they want to grow and they want to expand. and all power to them. So there are opportunities for us to take best practice in reuse and repair in a way that communities can benefit from. And I think they must have had nearly 100 cases through their door this last weekend. It was superb to watch what they're actually achieving. How you capture stuff like that in terms of a KPI, I don't know the answer to. And also the fact that we've got to report in a certain way and whether that changes. But don't forget, this is all a moving feast with government at the moment, and we're not necessarily sure where it's going to land up eventually.
Councillor Bean.
I just have a question, please, around the KPI, total average work days lost due to sickness, absence. As a couple, the target's down as a percentage, but the rest of the narrative talks about days lost. Should that be days rather than a percentage figure that's quoted, is question one. And I'm afraid I haven't been as detailed as Councillor Basher and looked back over time. I apologise, but obviously that's quite an alarming jump. Like, is that what we would normally expect around Q2 of a given year? I guess my question is how does that compare based on previous years? Is that a measure that we should be looking at going, it's difficult to put into context. And again, if I can, sorry, just really quickly add, it's just a terminology thing, but target behind schedule, it just doesn't feel quite like the right words in the context of all of these KPIs. I'm not sure what is exactly right, but it doesn't feel quite right to me.
Whilst I can't, I will check with Sarah Cragg, but I do recall from a discussion we had earlier today that because of the size of the workforce, you can disproportionately affect the figure with long-term sick cases as well. So it has an impact there, but I will pick it up and see what she says and feedback to you.
Councillor Basham.
Thank you for raising the question, Councillor Bean. It's very similar to a question that I asked at the performance panel, and I think others did as well. We were concerned about that. The explanation we got from the officer was that because of the way that full-time equivalents work and part-time employees work, they had to sort of gross up all of the employment days and then convert that to a percentage. That's why that's presented as a percentage number. But I agree with you, it feels like we're mixing our drinks, doesn't it? And we're not getting a line-for-line comparison, but we were assured that we were getting a line-for-line comparison. The other aspect there is the seasonality of flu and COVID season. But Sarah Cragg, who's the officer, was doing more work on it to get a greater understanding of it, because it's obviously off target, and we just don't know whether it's going to get worse or whether we're going to hit target or get near to it by the end of the year. So.
Any further comments or questions? If not, I'll move to the recommendation, which is to note the report. Thank you. The next thing we've got is a review of the work programme, and we're looking to confirm and agree the items on the committee work programme.
Chair, would you excuse me? I've got another meeting to go to at the parish. Thank you.
Okay, so first one we've got is the review of the housing associations, which is coming up next time, in March, 19th of March, and also the waste service provision, and then the Q3 key performance indicators. Yes, Councillor Phillimore.
This first one, the review of the housing associations, I mean, I don't know about anybody else in the room, but I'm not happy with the performance of some of the way that housing associations deal with complaints, or even accessible for complaints of the residents. So this one here has just got Kate Randall's name against it. Is there a desire to invite housing associations in?
Oh yes, they're coming in.
They're coming.
The two main ones are definitely coming in.
What, Vivid and Sovereign?
Vivid and Sovereign, to actually answer the questions. This was something
Okay,
that I
well,
raised to ask on performance specifically.
That's brilliant, and that's what we require, really.
Okay, so the other ones we've it's review discussions that we've also got TBCs. Oh, sorry, Councillor Bound.
I was just going to ask, are those the only housing associations? Because out in the sticks, it's not only Vivid and Sovereign. We've got Clarion in our area who are not up to the mark. L&G.
I think, Katie, if you can ask and find out whether we've got anybody else, because I know those two I have had confirmed. We definitely got them coming in, but I don't know if we've managed to get anybody else. Right, sorry. So yes, then the next that's those three. We've also got to be confirmed. So do we worry about these ones on? Yeah, because they're different. Right, so what we've done when we had our scrutiny chairs meeting, the ones that to be confirmed ones for the overview and scrutiny committee is one on social value, so doing scrutinising social value within the council. How the council works with local businesses, so we're looking at inviting festival place managers in. There's also one on on-street parking and EV charging, and a review of the communications protocol. We're still waiting for a topic form on that one. So do we need to put dates on that now, or? Okay, so we're waiting for officers to confirm that. Thank you. Going down, the other things we needed to talk about tonight, we've got two open task and finish groups. One which was on the housing allocation task and finish group, which we had some changes of group membership, and this has kind of got a bit lost in things. I think we still want to be doing this. That's want to really discuss that tonight and make sure everyone's still up for doing that one. And the other one is the transport policy. Now, there's been challenge in getting people to come forward to be on that one. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is whether or not people wanted to still continue with the task and finish group, because if there isn't the appetite for it across the groups, then there doesn't seem to be much point in pursuing it. Something I've been thinking, because one of the things, the areas we've looked at, we had a very good session back earlier in the year where we had Stagecoach, Hampshire, etc. all came in and gave us a really good briefing. But one of the areas that I think we could do with reviewing and scrutinising is getting some of the taxi companies to come in and hear things from their perspective, because I know I certainly hear reports from residents about how poor the service is, and obviously there's a potential bit of a possible slight monopoly maybe within the borough, and I think maybe we would just want a work programme item on that instead. I don't know what people think. We could always ask Network Rail to come in as well, or South West Railways or something. Right, I think David was first.
Yeah, no, Jackie, sorry, Chair, I would support you on that work package item, specifically on private hire vehicles. I think there's definitely a problem in the town. I'd be very interested to also hear from the officer with that as well, to see where we are. Residents ask me all the time, where on earth is Uber? Now, whether or not we wanted Uber here or not, but I think there's definitely a conversation to be had with our private hire operators to see what difficulties are they having.
As a matter of interest, I reached out and had a chat with the officer down in Southampton where they do operate with Uber. He explained it's quite a complex licensing arrangement. I think if we had the officer in talking about it from the licensing perspective, who else is it? Was it Councillor Thompson? You're on licensing, aren't you, as well? Have you and you are as well, aren't you? Yeah, so Uber's it's quite a complex sort of thing, so I think it's not totally within their control, because it's more to do with where drivers are sighted and things.
We were told many times that by Mr Draper that Uber are not interested in Basingstoke.
And I don't think that's quite the way it works, actually, but we could certainly look to get somebody in, I think, to talk about that.
Yeah, he definitely said that they weren't interested, but he also said it doesn't actually help very much, because if Uber comes to the town, they don't bring lots of extra drivers with them. They just take the drivers away from the companies that already exist. So we still only have the same number of drivers. So
I think we can certainly ask taxi companies to come in, get Alpha and Delta in at least, and if there's anybody who knows of any others, and let's hear it from them and what's their challenges and if there's anything that we can do here. Councillor Golding.
I appreciate I'm not on the committee and I'm adding to your work programme, but I think as part of that it would be really good for the committee to look at how many accessible vehicles there are in terms of private hire and taxis, because that is a real challenge for quite a lot of the members of our community.
Councillor Basham.
I would just add to that, if I may, the feedback from people at the Basingstoke Disability District Forum Christmas party was that it's not even, it goes beyond a licensing problem of accessible vehicles. We have plenty of accessible vehicles. What we have is lots of older drivers who have back problems and use that as a valid reason to not assist disabled people with accessible transport. We have quite a deep-rooted problem with community accessible transport for the disabled. I have to say though, you know, if you can't get people to be on the working group, the task and finish group, then I think this needs to be deferred until next year. I think we need to stop fishing around if people can't put their time into it. I've had to take the difficult decision not to, because we've got too many other committees going on, but it is important that we do it. So
I think the other area that we need to look at as well is, which you just sort of triggered the thought, is around the whole community transport. I mean, the big issue is, and I know Councillor Miller feels strongly about this, it's getting transport out to the rural areas and how where they're very underserved with buses and things. So that was kind of like one of the driving forces behind this task and finish group, and making sure that we are getting good transport links for those that don't drive or can't drive for whatever reason and can get into the town, because we are so car centric. But you know, any other thoughts on where we go with this?
How many people have volunteered so far?
We've got 4 now.
Right.
Who's on it? Oh, right. We have actually got Councillor Fawkes, Councillor Bose, Councillor Slimin and myself have all put ourselves forward to do it. So we could actually do it if we've got the 4 of us now, actually. That's good, because I wasn't aware of that. So the question is where we are. This is more a question, I think, for Ellie, where we are with the municipal year, whether it's worth waiting till the new year and then reschedule it from there, and that kind of eases off on the workload as well. Would everybody be happy with us doing that? Okay. Councillor McIntyre's request for
Yeah, that's the one that I've requested to bring in for the local plan update. For the because obviously several concerns have been raised amongst various stakeholders, residents, council members, and MPs, and decision-making process just appears to deviate from the objectives set by previous council motions. So really, I think it's bringing it in for a bit of scrutiny. So I've been working with the chair and setting that out and bringing that in, and what's the outcome really that we want to achieve, which is to just identify whether or not it has been transparent and community focused led. So I think it makes sense to bring it here where it's all out in the open and there's no arguments on social media or Twitter or whatever, and we can have a discussion and open about it. Thanks.
Thank you. I've got one other item on here. It says confirm the focus of the waste review. Right, okay, so the advice I've got here is the waste review is something that was possibly going to be done here at the over in Scrutiny Committee, but it could be going to CEP instead. And as long as we're happy for that, which does seem sensible because that's where it sits really. I see general nods around the table there. Agreed, thank you. Okay, I think based on that then we are finished and we can close the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody. It's good meeting tonight. Thank you.